Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jessa, and I'm so happy you're here for this episode of Better Sex. I've dedicated my professional life to helping couples enjoy a fulfilling, intimate life. I believe that sex is important. Our connections to other people matter, and we're not living our life to the fullest if we aren't connecting emotionally and sexually with our partner. That's why I'm here, bringing ideas and information to help you live and love better. You know, a lot of my topics are, specifically related to sex, of course. Well, with Better Sex Podcast, you would think so. But occasionally I like to have a guest on or discuss a topic that impacts sex, impacts your relationship, but it's a little bit separate from that, right? Like, because sex is happening within a relationship, things that affect our ability to be close and intimate and connected make a difference. So today's topic is about conflict. I mean, as a sex therapist, it's not like I don't do relationship work with clients, right? We can't separate the relationship from our sexual life. And conflict, of course, comes up all the time. And it's hard to have conflict well. I mean, we all have conflict, but we don't handle it well necessarily. And I certainly see plenty of people, and I'm sure plenty of you experience this, where conflict escalates instead of getting resolved. Right? It's a common problem. And we get caught in these loops and we have the same fights over again. And we have to avoid certain topics because we know they're going to go badly. It's a big deal. Right? And so I've got a guest today who, as she says, she just loves all things difficult. She's really made a living and a business out of helping people figure out conflict, how to do it well, how to manage relationships in this way. I mean, her perspective is wonderful. I agree with this. In conflict is this amazing opportunity for greater understanding and closeness. Once you work through this stuff, you deepen your relationship. And it doesn't feel like that when you're first arguing about the chores or whatever it is, but it's important, So that's what we're talking about today. We barely scratched the surface in this interview because there's a lot there, but luckily she has a book and lots of resources on her website, so you'll be able to learn more. So my guest is Lara Currie. She's a podcaster, a speaker. She wrote the book, Difficult Happens, and she's really passionate about helping people transform conflict. She largely works in the business world with small and medium businesses and people in the corporate world, but all of that is still relevant to relationships, right? So she brings her unique and really intuitive way of understanding what's going on for people in the way they act and in the way they react. And I think you're really going to enjoy the conversation. Hey, Lara, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Jessa. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and this is a little bit of a diversion for me because it's not a directly sex-related topic, but I think this is just crucial. People, struggle with difficult conversations. They struggle with difficult emotions, reactivity. This is something certainly my clients talk about. So I thought you'd be a perfect guest to have.
Oh, thank you for having me. I just love all things difficult. If we embrace the conflict, it leads to the greatest opportunity for growth and understanding, especially within relationships.
I don't think I've ever heard somebody say that before. They love all things difficult. I mean, certainly I see challenge as opportunity. It was like I can sort of always see the greener pastures on the other side of this stuff. But there's some hard stuff between here and there.
I love to dissect it. I like to dive in and see what is really going on. Because, at the end of the day, human beings, we all just want to be seen and heard and understood. And conflict and difficult things crop up because something's happening within us.
Okay, so say a little bit more about that.
Well, whenever we have a conflict, four things are happening. We're making an assumption. We have a judgment about that assumption that we've made.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have an expectation of what's going to happen next, because as human beings, we don't like to not know what's going to happen.
Right.
We kind of predict. And then with those three things, we then react. And it is the reaction itself that can be the problem, that can lead almost to a self-fulfilling prophecy.
And it sounds like, I mean, I'm sure this is part of what you're going to get into, but it sounds like we need to be challenging some of those things before we get to the reaction.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you can just put in a disruptor in between, when you hear something or there's some triggering event, like let's say you're having a conversation with a coworker and all of a sudden you're feeling a little tense. Maybe your jaw's a little tight or your stomach is a little sick. Well, right there, that's your body telling you something's going on. Mm-hmm. It's preparing your mind to make some judgments and expectations so it can predict and protect itself. So as soon as you can tune in to your body's reaction, especially in a conflict, that's when you can get curious and dive in a little deeper before you react.
Okay, so the body is generally the first signal.
It depends on who you are, but I'd say 98% of us, our body keeps the score. Our body's going to be the first thing that kind of denotes, something's going on.
I remember in grad school, we had a whole little sort of module about difficult conversations, and they called them a pinch. So when you feel this pinch, and they did refer to it like a body sensation, and we each could get to know where we feel those, right?
I like that. Yeah.
And to pay attention to that, right? Because that is a signal, though, something's off track. There's something to explore and be curious about.
Yeah. I know that when I'm talking with other people, whenever I sense a conflict or a threat or an embarrassment or anything that's kind of a negative emotion that I don't really want to have, I feel it in the pit of my stomach.
Yeah.
But when I have those negative emotions or those triggering reactions in my own mind, it shows up in my jaw and shoulders. Meaning if I'm feeling a little bit of shame or if I'm ruminating on something from the past, that's where it shows up in me. So when you know your body and when you know how your emotions show up in you, it can really be the key to understanding conflict in a deeper way.
Yeah. Now, is this the same thing as what's sort of referred to as a trigger? I mean, or is that a little bit distinct from what you're talking about?
Well, there's two types of triggers. Most people think of an emotional trigger leading them back to a violent event. Now, that is a specific kind of an emotional triggered reaction, and that's not what I'm talking about.
Right.
I'm talking about a triggered reaction. All day long, we take in information and we decipher what it means and we react to it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, sometimes we set up these patterns, these habits where we just are triggered to react, but we don't really explore it any further. And those reactions that are so inherent in us because we've been doing them for so long, they end up leading to a negative outcome. There is this practice in community planning where universities that build campuses or add on to their campus, they will not pave the roads or the pathways in between the buildings until the desire paths of the students have become known. Meaning,
you're kidding. So they wait for the trails in the grass to show up and then they make the paths. I never knew that.
Yeah, if you actually Google desire paths, some of the best universities that they have graphics of before, how they determined where these desire paths were and what were dangerous desire paths. So they'd have to put up, either walls or something.
Yeah, right. Don't go here.
Don't go in the middle of the street and run across the street to your dorm, But we have the same thing in our own lives. We have emotional desire paths. They are emotions that are like warm, comfortable sweaters to us. They're ones that we have a lot. I remember you had a show, I think it was episode 3, about shame.
Oh, yeah.
And Park Burgess talked about this.
Yes.
Some of us, we do go right to a certain emotion. Some of us are more comfortable feeling, that everyone's against them and it's not them, it's from the outside.
Yeah.
Other people, they might be more comfortable with shame because that's their family heritage. That's their heritage emotion.
Right. I mean, these are not random sweaters, right? I mean, we're trained up for some of this reaction, right?
Exactly.
This is what we've been sort of taught or have experienced and internalized in our families.
Mm-hmm. And our past, it basically informs our future. We only know what we've been through. Right. And that is all of, those are the glasses that we're looking through. So when it comes to conflict or any kind of difficult conversation, there's a lot to be aware of ahead of time.
Meaning, what sweater do you have, right? What's your lens? What's sort of the baggage you've brought into this is, I assume, what you're talking about, right? Like how...
Right. And what assumptions are you making about the conversation and how it's going to go?
Okay. So can we take apart those 4 things a little bit?
So we have the assumption. That's something that sometimes that's that people will call it stinking thinking. Like you're like, oh gosh, I got to talk to Margot again. Every time we talk, she whines about this or whines about that.
Okay.
So you're making some assumptions. And then you have a judgment about those assumptions.
Okay.
And the judgment is that Margot's difficult to deal with and I'm right.
Okay.
And then you have an expectation. Well, it's not going to go well. So I better prepare my mind and my body. And, your body doesn't know when a difficult conversation is happening and when you're just thinking about it. You're internalizing and your body is, again, like it keeps the score.
Yeah.
So you're almost going through it several times.
I can relate to that. I mean, I know that I've been guilty, like I'm sure plenty of listeners have been, about having conversations in my head, prepping for this stuff, getting all agitated and worked up. And it is like, I've been through a ringer before I ever go have the conversation. Doesn't set me up for success when I do it that way. I can tell you that.
Now, and one of the best ways to prepare for this kind of a situation is to do almost like an after action review. When you've had a conflict. Now, don't do it right away. You kind of got to get away from it. Or when you've even had an uncomfortable conversation. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the easier ones, like pick one from, a guy at the grocery store or someone who's more peripheral in your world.
Yeah.
And you kind of look at what happened and you dissect it going backwards. What was the outcome? All right. What happened right before the outcome? What were the assumptions that I was making around it? Mm-hmm. How would I like to act or react differently next time so that this type of scenario doesn't happen again?
All right. So what about an example for a couple? It doesn't have to be about their sex life exactly, but, some committed relationship. What are some examples of how we go from assumption all the way to reaction and outcome?
Let's talk about, so I had a girlfriend whose husband was always home at 6:00. And then often during this one project that he was working on, he started to show up later and later. And so she was getting upset. She had dinner ready. She was tired. She was done with the kids for the day. And what went from 6 went to 6:15, went to 6:30, and then 7. And he wasn't texting her to let her know. So she would just have to guess.
Right.
And so she told him, I'd like you to text me if you're going to be late. And he's like, okay, but sometimes I don't know until right up until the event, And she said, well, just text me anyway so that I'm not waiting here. So he did text her and said, I think I may be late tonight. Okay. He's trying to hold up his end of the bargain, but she's like, think, may, what do you mean? If you're late, how late are you going to be? And when we don't address it, and we don't talk about the underlying emotions around it, then it can lead to an escalation in conflict. In particular, if these little tiny micro breaches, like let's say she never said anything. Let's say she just got passive aggressive and was like, oh, your dinner's cold, it's on the table or whatever.
Right.
Then it just escalates. It makes something small become much, much bigger. And it impacts you, like you were saying, you carry that stuff with you all day.
Right. So what's someone to do? I mean, you got a couple here where they get into conflict. I suppose they have assumptions about, oh, you never listen to me, or you're not going to change anyway, or whatever it might be. And then they go into the conversation and they're reactive. Like, how do they start to take this apart and do this differently?
There are 2 things that they can do right away. Number 1, talk about themselves. Start off with, hey, can I talk to you about something? And do it in a time when it's not high conflict, when you're not both stressed out, because that never works. When you're defensive behavior is always matched by defensive behavior.
Right.
No one gets all huggy when someone's getting yelled at. So what you can do is you can set up a time where you can talk about it, or talk about it when things aren't so intense. And say, this is how I'm feeling. I want to share with you how I'm feeling about this. And, that takes a little bit of reflection. You need to look inward. And then you need to kind of check the facts. Well, I feel completely disrespected that he's showing up late. Is that a valid feeling? Mm-hmm. Yeah, a little bit, because he didn't let you know. So you can kind of check the facts on your emotions and then work through them. Because when every emotion has a purpose. Every single emotion is just another way that your brain is trying to give you information so that you can react and be safe. And if you are her husband in this scenario, what you can do is get curious. Don't defend. Don't, well, I have to, this job pays for blah, 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 blah. Don't go into that. Get curious. Well, tell me more about why you feel that way. How can I make you feel better? What would you like instead? If you get curious, you guys can brainstorm together, and the negative impact, sometimes you just can say, well, should we do a date night? Or how long is this going to happen? And it might even, like for really big conflicts, it might be something where you're like, this is kind of a deal breaker for me.
Yeah.
And those are the ones that we kind of don't want to address. And those little tiny micro breaches end up becoming, chasms in between our relationship.
Right. Hi, it's Jessa. We're just going to take a quick pause here, or a little breather in the middle of the show. Thanks for listening so far. I'm wondering if you have a question that you want me to answer on a future episode. You can actually record a question for me at our website, bettersexpodcast.com. You're going to find the recorder on the footer of every page and on the side of the episode posts. And if I choose your question, I'll play it on the air and answer it as part of the show. I'd love to hear from you. So, I suggest to people to get curious all the time, right? But it's sort of easier said than done. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering what the tips are, strategies for somebody that's, really struggles to do that. I guess what's happening is they're too far downstream. They've already been through the process of assumption and judgment and expectation and body reaction. And, it sounds like they need to catch this in advance. Like this, what do you call it? The debrief?
To do an after-action review.
After-action review. So if a couple's listening and they have a history of conflict, like this is a repeated thing, I guess they could go back and take some of this apart now, right?
Yeah,
what are the assumptions I tend to have about my partner?
Mm-hmm. And, first of all, you got to take care of yourself. First, I would check in with your own body, because if you are in conflict, even when you're not having a conflict, your body is tense. Your body is struggling. You need to do some self-care. Mm-hmm. And, get curious with your own body. Where is it showing up in me? When does it show up? And oftentimes when a conflict has been going on for a long time, or there are some bad feelings that you've had for a long time, they kind of become perpetual, meaning that's that warm sweater that we put on.
Right.
We wake up in the morning and we feel shame. We wake up in the morning and we feel fear or anger. And these are all protective emotions. Anger is the great protector.
Yes.
It usually comes right before the fear, which is another great protector. But most people fall into 4 different conflict personality types.
Okay.
Yeah, and those can show up like passively, and they can show up actively. I'll give you an example of what I mean. So my conflict personality type is I'm a pleaser fixer.
Okay.
I want to, acts of service is my love language. I want everyone to be happy. I want to, preemptively make people happy. It's something that I have to really be aware of in a conflict, especially in a conflict with a victim blamer.
Okay.
A victim blamer will go right to self-protection mode. And that's one of the most difficult conflict personality types to deal with, because everything has to happen a lot slower. They have to be doing a lot more processing. And, that is huge in a conflict. You've been thinking about it or ruminating. Your point of view. Mm-hmm. You need to leave space for people to process what you're saying. And being quiet can be hard.
Okay.
So let me tell you the other 2 conflict personality types. We've got the pleaser fixer. We've got the perfectionist controller. We've got the innocent avoider and the victim blamer.
Okay. Yeah. So please say a little bit more about each of these, because those sound really interesting.
Sure. So like I said, the pleaser fixer will oftentimes internalize any angst that's going on, and shame or some of the fear-based emotions are their comfy sweaters.
They're going to take this on.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's like it's their fault or something.
Right, right. And when they fix, which means so there's one that's internal and one that's external, one that's active and one that's passive.
Okay.
When they jump to fixing, they often will overstep other people's boundaries and they will rob them from experiencing natural consequences or problem solving. Some things are just not yours to fix. And when you jump in, you rob the other person.
Okay.
And oftentimes that involves like over talking them, not giving them time to process the information, trying to solve it before they can even, come up with some ideas on their own. Now, the perfectionist controller, well, the perfectionism they will put on themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They will try and have everything set up perfectly. Well, if dinner is always perfect, or if I always get to work on time, or if I, turn in my projects on time, then I will have success and people will like me. When it comes to controlling, that's when they can kind of overstep other people's boundaries. They're great problem solvers. They see what needs to be done. And there are benefits to each one of these conflict personality types, obviously, or else we wouldn't have them. But that they can overstep your boundaries by taking over and robbing you of the opportunity to learn a skill or do something yourself.
It also sounds like that one might be somewhat rigid of expectations. Like if they expect themselves to be perfect, they expect that of other people too. Does that?
Yes, very much so.
Okay.
And they want it done in a certain way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which sometimes you just got to let people do it in their own way, even if that's not how you'll do it.
Right.
I bet this would come up with couples in a household and how you keep the household.
Yes.
No, the innocent avoider, the innocent part is more like internal. They just like, oh, no, I'm not going to look at that. Oh, I'm not going to go into that. They don't delve into what's going on too much, especially if it's something that they might be fearful around.
Okay.
So a lot of passive aggressive people will be innocent avoiders, where they'll just be like, I don't know what you're talking about. Didn't I say that? Oh, I thought I left that on the table. Oh, I thought I texted you and told you I'd be late. That kind of thing.
Okay.
Or they avoid altogether.
Yeah.
Where they basically, they overstep your boundaries of time and energy because you are caught chasing them. This happens a lot with difficult clients, where you're constantly chasing after them for a work product that you can't deliver your side until they deliver theirs. Well, it can happen in relationships too, where you kind of want to talk about something more and they don't.
Right. And you can get stonewalled. I mean, that would be the classic thing, stonewalling.
Yeah.
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 Okay. And the victim blamer, would you just say a little bit more about that one?
Yeah. The victim blamer is very defensive. They walk around very defensively. And they usually have suffered some earlier emotional traumas that have kind of left them consistently self-protecting.
Okay.
But they really feel like the whole world is against them. Like no one understands them and no one sees them for who they are. And that victimizing, that victimhood that they feel, that's the internalizing. And the blaming is the external, where they might try and put something on you, and that's how they can overstep your boundaries and make it your responsibility. Or try to, I call it coloring reality, where they're just going to color it up and make it completely different than you see reality. But it's hard with a victim blamer sometimes to confront the specific verbiage because they usually will end up adding in more stuff or, well, yeah, but you didn't do this, or they kind of go all around. I call it getting tossed in a word salad.
Right.
You're talking about eggs and the next thing you know, there's oranges being discussed.
Right.
It gets confusing.
So it sounds like from that all four of these in the external version of it, when they're problems, it's overstepping the other person's boundaries. That's a consistent theme. When those aren't done well, right? We're not in the positive part of these types.
Yeah, very much. And it leads to their expectations. Yeah. And when their expectations are not met, well, then there's disappointment. And in that disappointment is more judgment.
Mm-hmm. And I imagine there are strategies for, there's value in figuring out what type you are. Mm-hmm. Right? Are people generally one type, or do they have a predominant one, but some others, or how does that work?
Yeah, we can all go through. I mean, we've all been all of these at some point in our life, but there's one that just fits you better. There's one that you go to right away, and you'll probably recognize it right away. Like whether you're like, yeah, I'm kind of an avoider, or yeah, well, I mean, I do kind of play the martyr sometimes.
Yeah. Okay. And then once you figured out your type, I imagine there are strategies about how to handle that better, right? Like it's not like we're going to change who we are, but we can behave better.
Exactly.
Right?
And to recognize its gifts.
Yeah.
And so when its gifts do crop up, you can thank it. Be like, oh, thank you. Yes, do I need to protect myself here? I need to kind of check the facts on what's going around. Do I have some culpability? Are there some natural consequences that I need to suffer? Have I overstepped? Do I need to draw my boundaries firmer?
Yeah.
There's a lot of, but once you're aware of it and you get curious with yourself, or at least explore it, we all have almost a duty to get better as humans.
Right.
Stay stagnant,
Certainly in relationship, I think we have that duty, right? Like that really calls us to improve and grow if we want to stay in a relationship and have it be, enjoyable, positive.
Absolutely. I mean, can you imagine if you were the same person you were 15 years ago?
No.
Yeah, no thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you. No, thank you. And it's not like it was horrible, but no, I'll take the progress I've made so far.
Yeah.
So I guess, obviously a lot of this must be covered in your book. So we'll get to that at the end. I have another question for you. I'm thinking about a couple of clients, couples that I've met with over the years that get into, I want to say, a competition.
Mm-hmm.
Who's going to be heard first? I share what's going on with me. It hurts your feelings. And then it's about your feelings, but I never got to talk about my thing. And neither one feels heard. You know what I mean? Like they get into this, whose feelings matter more in that moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I would love to hear your take on that and how people could deconstruct that and do that better.
This is the essence of almost every conflict.
Yeah.
You can't see me. You're not hearing me. You
Right.
don't know what I feel like. Because really, all in all, we don't know. We'll never know what it's like to look through someone else's eyes. We can assume and guess, but we don't know.
Yeah.
And so there's a way to have just a type of discourse that's respectful and clear and speaks to the three things. So there are three ways that people take in information or like to learn, and it's kinesthetically, by feeling or by touch, auditorily, so they like to hear it, and then just by doing. So those are the three main ways.
Okay.
Well, when you listen to someone's complaints, they'll kind of let you know exactly what the emotion is behind that. Well, I felt this and you made me feel bad and my stomach, whatever it is, was it feeling? Or, well, you say this, I always hear this from you. Or is it, you did this, you're always doing this, so you need to speak to that. Do you see what I mean? There's like two different ways. And they will tell you, they'll let you know how they interpret information. So once you know,
if somebody says, you always do this, and then the response is, I never said that, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's just going to be a complete mismatch.
Exactly.
You've got to be talking in the same mode.
Yeah. And you have to address the doing.
Yeah.
So, let me tell you why I did that, because I felt this way. When I feel this way, I do this. When I feel this way, I react this way and do this. So you have to take your language and interpret it into their language for them.
Yeah. Any other tips about not escalating with a partner?
Yeah, one thing, especially with like innocent avoiders or victim blamers, or frankly, I have to say, we are all unique, but with a theme. Mm-hmm. I have a love-hate thing with labels and boxes.
Yeah. Labels
and boxes should only serve you, not minimize you or box you in.
Right.
So if they make you feel understood and heard and a part of a bigger community, awesome. Wear that label.
Yeah.
If not, shed it. Get rid of it. Doesn't work for you. So when you're talking with them, especially face to face, try sitting beside them and focusing elsewhere. Don't stand right in front of them and have this conversation. And even better, go for a walk.
Okay.
Walking side by side, it gets your juices flowing and your brain. There was some study. I wish I had written that down. It was about just going outside for 15 minutes into nature and how it can completely change everything from your physical, internal to your mental state. I think it was in Deep Work. Well, if I think of it, I'll
if you think of it, let me know. I can put it in the show notes.
Yeah. But even just that can help change our mood and will help inform how the whole conversation is going to go.
Okay. So let's see if I can summarize what I've learned so far today. taking things apart. And again, I'm forgetting your term for that, about figuring out what kind of assumptions we make and judgments we make about our partner on what's our comfy sweater, and understanding that so we're prepared.
Yeah, I call that the conflict loop.
Okay. Getting clear about our conflict personality type and what those challenges might be, as well as the gifts, but how to do that better. Speak to the other person's way of learning or taking in information, right? So whether they hear it, they do it, or they feel it.
Yeah, it's kind of, in this case, it's like their emotional language.
Yeah. So unlike the love languages, is their emotional language, right? So making sure you're listening for that and responding in that way.
Yes.
And then I guess, sitting side by side or walking side by side seems like you're getting out of an adversarial physical position. Face to face is like conflict, right? Or it can be.
Exactly. Yeah.
So changing your body position and your location and getting outside, things like that.
Yeah, definitely.
Those are all great ideas. And I would love for you to just say a word about your book and where people can learn more, because I think, we've just sort of scratched the surface here.
Sure.
So how can people take this stuff and get way more information?
Well, there's a couple ways. You can order my book. It's called Difficult Happens: How Triggers, Boundaries, and Emotions Impact You Every Day. And that's available on my website and on Amazon. And my website, I have a lot of free resources and stuff that you can download, and videos that you can watch that can help you.
Great.
And that is at laracurrie.com. I spell my name a little different, so it's LARACURRIE.com.
Okay.
And on my podcast, Difficult Happens: Effective Communication for Bosses. I say for bosses, but it really is for everyone. Effective communication is effective communication.
Yeah, conflict is conflict, right? Triggers are triggers. It doesn't,
Exactly.
whether it's happening at work or it's happening at home, it's really the same process. So.
Yeah, and I do have a download if your listeners would like. It's at laracurrie.com/10 tips. And it's just 10 tips on how to deal with conflict.
That would be great. I think this has been a fabulous conversation. It comes up in my work all the time, and you're just such a wonderful resource.
Oh, thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, there are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get-to-know-you and question-and-answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.